Welcome back to Investing, Markets and Money. And this week we're talking about the quantum computing sector, which is probably something a lot of people don't know about, but which I personally have been hearing some fund managers talking about recently. And joining us on the program today, we have Elvira Kuramshina, who's joining us from Wisdom Tree. You are a director of the quantitative finance team over at Wisdom Tree, aren't you?
Associate Director of Quantitative Research and focusing on thematic strategies a lot in my role.
And so quantum computing, some people will know a bit about it, but a lot of people will be coming to this very fresh. Can you just give us a quick overview of the sector, what's involved with that?
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to discuss. And I think it would be helpful actually to start with defining what is quantum computing and maybe discussing how quantum computers are different from classical computers. And an easy way to introduce this distinction between the two is actually to say that quantum computers will not come to replace classical computers. They actually will augment classical computers. They will work in tandem with them, and they will also supercharge our problem-solving abilities, so basically pushing the boundaries of what is currently possible with classical compute. And this also has very important implications across various industries if we're thinking about quantum computers exactly achieving exponential speed-ups over classical computers and maybe even tackling certain problems that are completely intractable for classical machines. So we can take some quite complex problems and then achieving maybe more precise, more accurate solution sometimes can have very important economic implications. And speaking about the sector itself, at Wisdom Tree, we view quantum computing from the perspective of quantum computing ecosystem. And within the ecosystem, we have actually a diverse set of companies. So given that we're talking about quantum computers, I think it's very natural to assume that they would be hardware providers, right? Hardware manufacturers. And alongside hardware, of course, we will have software providers as well. But in addition to that, we also have providers that are basically giving cloud-based access to quantum systems. And this is very important for enabling experimentation with the technology in the near term as well, and democratizing the access to the technology. And in addition to that, we're also recognizing other approaches, for example, quantum annealing. And quantum simulation is also quite important if we're speaking about near-term adoption and near-term experimentation by various companies. And alongside this, within the ecosystem, we can also highlight such adjacent technologies and areas like post-quantum cryptography or quantum networking and communications. And quantum networking is actually especially important if we're thinking about scaling current quantum computers to more powerful machines in the future. So we're talking about distributed quantum computing and establishment also of quantum internet. And finally, also looking at artificial intelligence, I think this would be something that people can see quite naturally, that all the enabling players that are providing various materials, components, systems that go into building and running quantum computers are also very important players within the ecosystem itself.
And I've heard some professional investors, wealth managers talking about how quantum computing is going to be the next AI, or they'll say something like, it's going to eat AI's lunch, and a lot of the things that we're excited about with the AI sector at the moment will become invalid. Is that a fair comment, or is it just almost like a progression from where we are with AI?
So similar to my comment about quantum computers augmenting what is possible with classical computers, we're viewing quantum computing more as an enabler alongside AI, because there will be various applications where quantum can advance the progress, certain progress within AI itself. And there is already research that is happening right now to show basically this potential utility in the future when we have more powerful machines. And at the same time, AI is also helping to drive further breakthroughs in quantum computing. If we are speaking about, just going a bit technical, if we're speaking about error correction, so AI definitely plays a role there. If we are thinking about circuit design for quantum computers, that's another application area for AI. So these two technologies will work in tandem and will actually amplify the impact of each other.
And I hear talk of something called Q-Day. Can you explain what that is and why that's important?
Thank you for this question. This is actually a very important concept to introduce when we're speaking about quantum computers. So Q-Day essentially will signify the day when we will have a powerful enough quantum computer that will be able to execute an algorithm that was invented in 1994 by Peter Shor. And essentially what this algorithm does, it can factor a very large number. And the implications here are actually quite vast when it comes to cryptography, because our modern cryptography relies exactly on this feature not the feature, but actually the capability of classical computers within factoring. Currently, it's not. It's something that is intractable for classical computers to factor a very, very large number, and this is basically the base for all the most cryptographic methods currently. And with the quantum computer, it would be possible to very quickly execute this algorithm to factor a large number and decrypt that data. It means that quantum computers can break current encryption and decrypt the data, which is basically encrypted with modern methods. And this is what is also being already exploited by some threat actors today. We're seeing the rise in harvest now, decrypt later types of attacks, meaning that threat actors, it's just enough for them to steal the data today in the hope of getting access to a quantum computer tomorrow and basically decrypting that piece of information that they stole.
So is this Q-Day, is this like something someone will suddenly one day have it? Like one institution or one group or something like that will suddenly have that capability?
Exactly. When we will see this instance that a quantum computer, that there will be a powerful enough quantum computer that will be able to execute this algorithm, that would signify Q-Day. So currently, if we're looking at cryptography, one of the widely used method is RSA 2048, and 2048 actually signifies the number of bits in there, and it corresponds, I think, approximately to a number that has 617 digits in it. So it's a very, very large number. So currently, it's possible to run these algorithms for very small numbers, basically factoring small numbers. And to do it for very large numbers, we need very, very powerful quantum computers. And this is actually, by most ambitious timelines, is several years away. So 2030 is the most ambitious timelines that are given by several leading players in the space in terms of delivering potentially a system that will be powerful enough to execute this algorithm and be able to also break the encryption.
So this is going to be quite a transformative event when it happens.
Yes, exactly. And this is exactly what is driving global awareness about the technology right now, because the transition to quantum safe algorithms, quantum safe standards, has to happen already today in advance of Q-Day, so that we future-proof our systems, we harden our systems in expectation of this potential in the future.
And are we seeing some meaningful adoption of quantum computing now ahead of Q-Day, for example, with sort of hybrid solutions?
So what is happening right now, you're exactly right, that many companies are exploring quantum computing in conjunction with classical computers. And this is what is called a hybrid architecture. So basically quantum classical workflows. In general, when we are running quantum computers, classical computers are playing a very crucial role in terms of pre and post processing. So even in the future, when we'll have powerful machines, quantum computers will work in tandem with classical computers because of this pre and post processing steps as well. And what is happening right now, a range of companies are looking to harness the power of quantum computers within hybrid architectures, because the current state of quantum hardware, the official term is that we are in the noisy intermediate scale quantum computing. So basically the capabilities are rather limited in comparison to the full potential that is expected from a powerful machine in the future. However, within hybrid workflows, it's possible to harness that power for a very specific step in a certain calculation routine, which is either, again, intractable for classical computers or where classical computers are not as efficient. And it also enables experimentation with the technology. So even if we are not yet seeing realization of a meaningful quantum advantage, and I have to define what quantum advantage is here. So basically, quantum advantage signifies outperformance of quantum computers over classical computers in meaningful tasks. And today, we are seeing basically the reports of companies saying that they did achieve certain, for example, improvements in certain steps within their processes. So it's some degree of partial realization of that quantum advantage. And we are expecting to see more of that in the years to come. So it will be basically the near-term utility from quantum computers within this hybrid architectures. But at the same time, companies are already experimenting with the technology, preparing the algorithms, and this is where software actually side is playing a very important role as well, preparing for quantum era, preparing for that day when we will have powerful enough quantum machines. So it's not just limited to hybrid architectures, but we're also seeing companies who are basically looking to harness the power of quantum computers in the future with more powerful machines.
And what are we seeing in terms of the sort of asset raising for this sector? I mean, is it sort of small private startups raising money, or is it bigger companies that are just investing their own resources? I mean, what's the landscape look like there?
This is a very interesting and very important question. So I think the momentum in the space has been clearly undeniable over the last months. That also drove certain excitement on the investor side. If we're looking at public markets, it has to be said actually that there are very few publicly traded pure play companies in quantum computing, and most of the pure play companies are in the private space, and the private space is actually quite vibrant. And what we have seen over the last months is quite strong financing rounds from leading hardware providers in the space. And this is also an important barometer of investor sentiment, of potential future innovations that we will see in the future, and where the sector is going, essentially reflecting the momentum in the space. Because looking at quantum computing, it's important obviously to look not just at the public markets but also at the private markets, because this is a very, very vibrant ecosystem with diverse players, and this is where you can see all the activity that is also happening in the space.
So you're seeing a mixture of, there are some small private players who are rapidly growing and raising money through various financing rounds. But I presume also some larger guys, larger computing companies and software companies are going to have to devote some amount of resource to this in terms of R&D if they're going to stay competitive.
Yes, absolutely. And INQ, for example, is one company that's just recently did a raise. So, and this is also quite important from the perspective of enabling the companies to finance quite intensive R&D if you're thinking about advancing the technology further. And it's also quite an important point from the investor's perspective that we have a range of leading tech companies who are committed to the space, and they have immense resources that they can also dedicate to progressing the space further.
And presumably this is something that governments are going to be very interested in as well, and therefore there
That's
are going to
exactly
be
right.
incentives and financing and things like that available for companies in the sector.
Exactly right. So government strategies are actually one of the key catalysts currently in the quantum sector. And we have seen, for example, this year, increasing focus on the technology. So in the previous years, we already had billions raised in funding globally across key players in the space, and obviously United States, European Union, China is a very strong player in terms of also announced funding. I think they have announced around 15 billion in cumulative funding dedicated to advancing quantum capabilities. Japan, South Korea, all of these countries are dedicating, resources, and they also have various initiatives to collaborate, to actually spearhead this collaboration between academia, between startups, and then governments. So it's important from this perspective, from enabling further breakthroughs, and at the same time from the funding perspective, that can also represent an important source of revenues for companies that are within emerging technologies. Again, if we take, for example, IonQ, I think they were one of the publicly traded pure players that had the biggest contract that was awarded to them by the US Air Force lab, and it was around, I think, 55 million. So it's quite a large number in terms of the revenues for companies. And on this front, of course, government funding is an essential part to enable further progress in the space. And we are also seeing it as a catalyst towards action across enterprises. So if we take post-quantum cryptography again, which is the field that is, the aim basically is to secure the systems against future quantum threats and to switch to quantum safe standards. In the UK, we have National Cybersecurity Center, and just in 2025, they issued guidance for migrating to post-quantum cryptography, and also the timelines for enterprises basically to consider. And this type of initiatives are exactly driving awareness, and they're also indicating urgency in terms of further actions that the companies have to take.
And this, some people will be listening to this going, oh my goodness, Q-Day is going to arrive and someone's going to come and steal all my money from the bank. Mm-hmm. Is that likely to happen, or is it going to be as sudden as that, do you think, or is it more going to develop over at least weeks, if not months?
The good news is that already last year, National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US approved 3 standards in post-quantum cryptography that can be implemented by companies already today, exactly to protect their digital infrastructure. Other ways to do it are within quantum networking and communications, and the technology there is called QKD, quantum key distribution. So together with QKD, together with PQC, already give us these avenues to ensure that our digital infrastructure is safe against quantum threats. But the companies, of course, have to act already today. And this is probably the biggest risk, if some businesses might be complacent in terms of Q-Day arriving. And another risk is, of course, that certain progress might happen faster. We might see certain breakthroughs that can bring Q-Day even closer than current expectations are, basically in terms of 5 to 10 years.
And from the perspective of someone who wants to invest in the quantum computing sector, are there any risks there that they should be aware of, other than the normal risks from investing in anything, really?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the biggest risks is, of course, tied to the development of the technology itself, to the breakthroughs. Of course, we have roadmaps which are being issued by companies that are suggesting, for example, by X date, and 2030, I was saying, is one of the most ambitious timelines that are being given by several leading players. This is the day when we are basically expecting to see this powerful quantum computers. But it can happen that due to certain engineering challenges, there might be certain delays in those roadmaps. And that's why I think it's quite important to watch the updates and to see how the companies are guiding and the milestones that they are hitting. And we've seen actually interesting positive developments this year. For example, IBM, just a week ago, they unveiled the latest chip, Nighthawk, and also another experimental chip called Loon. And that chip actually has all the core components that are required for a fault-tolerant system in the future that they're aiming to deliver in 2029, and it's called Starling. So it's not yet as powerful as, for example, the computer that will execute Shor's algorithm, but it's already very powerful to achieve quantum advantage across various use cases and across a range of industries. And for investors, of course, how companies are progressing is important to monitor and to see basically whether there are like any delays. And in addition to that, some of the important things is, of course, about the commercialization of the technology and the adoption across companies, how that translates into revenues, and all the experimentation that we are also like expecting to see within hybrid architectures and this quantum classical workflows. We just earlier this year, we have already like seen some reports, for example, in finance, HSBC and Vanguard were the companies that reported that they are actually looking at the technology and they achieved certain improvements there. And within other areas, we are also like seeing similar reports. AstraZeneca was one of the companies that collaborated with INQ and NVIDIA within drug discovery, basically, to do a very specific thing. So without going into details, but essentially they were able to show that there are certain improvements that they can achieve within hybrid architectures, and seeing more use cases, seeing more examples of that, basically signals that are showing us increasing adoption is quite important for investors to watch as well. And in addition to that, I would just say that valuations, of course, are another important concern and question that comes up whenever we are speaking about emerging technologies, like in general, not just about quantum computing. And of course, what is influencing financial markets in the short term in terms of macroeconomic uncertainty and other factors, that, of course, has important implications on company valuations in the short term. And this is why adopting a longer-term horizon when it comes to emerging technologies, and especially when we're speaking about quantum computing. So if we're thinking 5 to 10 years about realizing more powerful machines, that's also, in general, a good guidance in terms of maybe your portfolio allocation there, right? And from that perspective, this is also one way basically to ensure that you're not disrupted by very high volatility in the space, because you are investing for the long term and for the potential that will be realized across several years, because quantum computing sector market will mature in waves, and we will see basically waves of innovations and breakthroughs that will happen in the sector, and that all will be reflected in a certain way in the valuation of companies. And sometimes, of course, excitement about the technology can run ahead of the fundamentals in the short term, but it's important to be cognizant of the long-term potential of those technologies as well.
And I mean, we've seen a little bit in AI already, where there's discussion about how much energy resources the data farms are using, and how there could be capacity constraints. Is that something that quantum computing faces as well, just like physical expansion constraints that might create plateaus in the development?
That's actually like a very important question, and I would like to answer here not just even from the perspective of some hardware bottlenecks, right, technology bottlenecks, but also from the perspective of potential talent shortage. So this is something that has to be addressed as well, especially thinking about adoption of this technology further on, because it takes years also to train people, to educate people there. And this is something that universities globally are already like addressing, because obviously we're seeing the momentum in the space and more programs also like are being opened and awareness is being raised about this technology. That's for sure. But that's one of the things and also one of the challenges that the industry faces. When it comes to other potential bottlenecks, so if we're speaking about energy, so there are different comparisons here, and I also have to define that there are various ways actually to build quantum computers, and it all depends on a qubit. Qubit is basically a basic unit of information when it comes to quantum computers, similar to bits in classical computers. And there are various ways to realize qubit. So there are probably 5 or 6 widely used qubit modalities. And this is essentially the approach to realizing a qubit. And depending on that modality, obviously the energy needs might differ as well. For example, if we're looking at superconducting qubits, so it requires probably more complex hardware setup. It requires cryogenics. Some other modalities require cryogenics as well, but just to put it into perspective. So cryogenics, dilution refrigerator, some other components, all of them would require control systems. So there are various materials that go into building quantum computers. And essentially, if there is shortage in supplying any of those components, that of course would represent a potential bottleneck. In terms of the energy needs, if we're thinking that quantum computers can actually achieve exponential speedups over classical computers, so when we will have powerful machines, they will be using much less energy for solving those problems that classical computers are solving today. But the biggest probably impact on the energy side also can come from the fact that quantum computers can enable breakthroughs when it comes, for example, to materials design, next generation battery design, again, sustainable, more eco-friendly materials, better carbon capture, various things that would impact our carbon footprint and energy consumption as well.
And you guys at Wisdom Tree, you've been building your own quantum investment strategy. How do you go about doing that, given that obviously there's a big component of the market is private, and then there's another side of the market which is going to be big tech companies like, let's say, IBM, which you've mentioned already, that's obviously not deriving a lot of its revenue from quantum computing at the moment. They're doing a lot of other stuff.
Yes.
So when it comes to building an investment strategy that tries to maximize exposure to that theme, what sort of companies and opportunities do you have to look at for that?
Thank you for this question. That's actually an excellent question, and you exactly defined it very well in terms of public market having only few pure players, and what is basically the best approach also to capture the growth potential associated with the space, right? And at the same time also thinking about the period of exposure and thinking about an investable strategy. So when we designed our quantum computing strategy, we thought about 2 key concepts. First, it's ecosystem approach, and second, it's relevancy framework. And these 2 concepts in conjunction, they allow us to target growth opportunities within quantum computing along the technology's maturity curve, starting already with near-term utility, but then going into fault-tolerant quantum era and even beyond that. And essentially, we rely on relevancy framework here, exactly because public markets have only very few pure play companies and a range of diversified leaders and innovators with very meaningful contribution to advancing the space. And IBM is actually a prime example here. And relevancy framework exactly allows us to select companies that are most relevant and most meaningful for further breakthroughs in the space, for advancing the space, and that they also stand to benefit the most from wider adoption of quantum computing in the future. And we are doing it also in collaboration with Classic, a pure play quantum software company that is deeply integrated into the quantum computing ecosystem. And this partnership ensures that our strategy is grounded in world-class expertise in quantum computing, and that it's also driven by deep insights into the space. So in addition to relevancy, we also recognize purity, and we do that within our weighting approach. So within our weighting, we employ a two-step weighting approach. In the first step, we are looking at relevancy, and we are overweighting higher relevancy companies and underweighting low relevancy companies. And in the second step, this is where we recognize the importance of purity, and we overweight pure players in the space and we underweight diversified companies. And in the end, we get a balanced exposure to pure players and diversified leaders, and a strategy basically that delivers this capture of growth potential in the space while at the same time mitigating the risks associated with an emerging technology. Because it's exactly right that, going back to the example of IBM, it's very clear that quantum computing doesn't represent any meaningful revenues for the company, right? But they are one of the important
innovators.
Companies, exactly, innovators driving the breakthroughs.
And I'm afraid, just finally, I wanted to ask you, when you're looking at a strategy like that, you've already mentioned this is a long-term play, the quantum computing market. Mm-hmm. Presumably you anticipate over time we'll see more companies coming onto the market as listed companies that are much more pure play than the ones that you currently have access to. So the strategy could actually become a little bit more diverse as the sector develops.
This is exactly what we are expecting. So as I mentioned, that the private space is very vibrant in quantum computing sector, and we are expecting these companies to go public at a certain point in time in the future, especially thinking about the software side, when we will see more meaningful breakthroughs in hardware and basically coming closer to the day when we will have powerful quantum computers. I believe more companies also on the software side will choose to go public as well, because that would mean that they will have more revenues, they will be operationally more mature, right? And they would be at the scale where they could choose to go public. And that's also quite important for investors in terms of like thinking what the strategy could be in several years' time down the line, if they have like 5 to 10 years, for example, investment horizon. And our relevancy framework is exactly the approach that allows us to select the most relevant companies into the portfolio, and meaning all the pure play companies that will come to public market, of course, will be assessed through the lens of relevancy and will be added to the portfolio if they are highly relevant for the space. And over the last few months, we actually already saw some developments in terms of 2 companies potentially joining public markets in the future. It's Inflection and Xanadu. And Xanadu actually announced it just recently, its intention to go public via a SPAC merger. And that just signifies again the momentum that we are seeing happening in the space.
No, I think that sounds really, really exciting. And thank you very much for coming on the podcast to talk about it and tell our listeners a little bit more about it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Elvira.
That was a pleasure, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Like and subscribe to our channel for more great investing ideas. You can find us on thearmchairtrader.com, as well as on X, Instagram, and TikTok. You can subscribe to our free newsletter for news, insight, and tips to help you navigate the financial markets. The content of this podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. The views and opinions expressed by guests or hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the Armchair Trader. Investments can go up and down in value, and you may not get back the amount you originally invested. Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future results. We do not provide any personal investment, tax, or legal advice. Always do your own research or seek independent professional advice before making any financial decisions. The Armchair Trader is a media company and is not authorized or regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority.